Welcome to Scanner School. I'm Phil Lichtenberger, and this podcast is here to teach you everything to know about the scanner radio hobby. Today, we have a special guest on today's podcast, an expert in the field of radio communications and natural disaster preparedness. I want to welcome Haskell Moore onto today's podcast. And Haskell reached out to me by going to our website over at scannerschool.com and booked this session with me. And I'm really glad that he is here to share his story and his experience with emergency preparedness, especially when it comes to hurricanes. Haskell not only has experience with disaster preparedness, but also with the scanner radio and the two-way radio hobby in general. His knowledge in both fields makes him a really excellent guest to have on this podcast, and it's my hope that you're able to take some information away from today's conversation and put it into practical use. Now, there will be some links in today's podcast episode for Haskell's book, and we will put those into the description of this podcast episode. So if you're interested in purchasing Haskell's book after listening to today's podcast episode, you'll find all that information in the notes. So let's get right into today's conversation with Haskell. Haskell, thank you so much for joining us today on the Scanner School podcast. It's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you so much, Phil. It's a real honor to be here.
So before we get started on what you are here to talk about today, let me just get a background on you. What's your background in radio, and introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm going to start with something outside of what you just asked.
Sure.
And that is to say, I really, really like your show, the material that you produce. You have a real gift for making things simple and understandable. And even for somebody who's been doing this for 50 years, I still am impressed and enjoy watching your podcast and your YouTube channel and so forth.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So about me, I retired in 2020 after a 40-year career in information technology. And when I retired, I was the crisis manager for BP. You may know them as British Petroleum, but I was the global IT crisis manager for BP. Lived in the Houston area from 73 until I retired in 2020, and I now live in a small town outside of San Antonio. And my adjunct role at BP was teaching hurricane preparedness, and I still do this today. And I want to drop a few things in here that sound like they're promotion. They are actually promotion, but as you'll see, most of these things are done for free. It has been my goal from day one. I've never charged for a webinar or a seminar ever, but if anybody's interested in having a seminar for their business, for their home and family, for any kind of corporate entity, homeowners association, church, anything, just drop me a note at haskell@hidefromthewind.com. And I believe you said you were going to post that information also as well.
Yep.
For those who are in a hurricane zone, I have a website, hidefromthewind.com, and there is a wealth of information and checklist out there to help you get ready for a hurricane, tropical storm, or a flood. And there's also a couple of cool discount codes. I'm a brand affiliate for Furman Generators. So if you're looking for a generator, you can get 30% off your entire order on the FurmanPowerEquipment.com website. And then there's a 10% discount code for Maglite flashlights. So again, both of those are on the HideFromTheWind.com website. So a little bit about my scanning. I've always been interested in electronics since, as going all the way back to second or third grade. And when I was in sixth grade, I got this little thing. This is a Juliet 6-channel walkie-talkie. And we got a pair of these, and then my buddies that lived in the neighborhood each got a pair. And we had a ball with these things. And I just fell in love with wireless communication, electronics. And then a year later, my mother got me a CB, a B&K Cobra 5-channel CB with a 102-inch whip. And we put that on the car, and that only fueled the fire even more. And then when I was 13, I discovered Radio Shack, and basically been getting their mail until the time they went out of business at Radio Shack. I just loved that place. And it was like 20 Christmases all put together the first time I walked in the door there. And then I got my first shortwave radio that was a already built kit when I was a senior in high school, and got hooked on shortwave listening and the HF bands.
Nice. So that's quite an extensive history, not only through radio, but getting involved with it. And it's always interesting to see some of the equipment. I'm glad you still have it, in your hand. It's, to me, again, I keep, here's my first, scanner radio.
Mm-hmm.
And just to be able to still have that hardware, I mean, whether or not the capacitors in it are still going to function or not, or
Right.
and like that, but just to be able to look at it and remember that time and the place in your life where that was either given to you or you were actively using it, it's still something that it's nice to have. I mean, it's not like everybody keeps their first car or something like that. It takes up too much room, but it'd always be nice to have that. But to have the hardware and the radio, I think is just something, it's something that keeps you rooted and grounded in the hobby, whether it is CB or scanning or any other two-way radio or even shortwave listening. It's something interesting. So I'm very happy to see, personally, I'm happy to see that you still have that piece of hardware that you were using. So when it comes to scanning, how did you get involved with the scanner radio hobby?
Well, let me ask you a question first,
Sure.
if I can, Phil. Which radio
Absolutely.
is that? Which scanner?
This is a Fanon Courier
Yeah.
Slim 6. So this is, again, going back to the Radio Shack days and whatnot, there's always somebody else that made something very similar or made for
Mm-hmm.
them. Again, Radio Shack was rebranded GRE or Uniden scanners. So you can find a Uniden Slim 4 or Pocket Scan 4 or Pocket Scan 6. That looks very similar to the Fanon. I don't know if one was made for the other, but they are pretty close if you ask me. So, but I ended up now, I have my original, and then I've got one I bought off eBay because there was something that I wanted from that particular one, or no, it was because I wanted to turn it on and use it, but I didn't want to blow up my original if the caps are bad.
Right.
And then I ended up buying a whole kit recently of one because it had there's on them, there's the recharging circuitry is external. So you have to plug the DC power brick into this Y splitter with an on-off switch that'll allow you to charge it. And it had that as part of a package. So I paid for another scanner just specifically to get that little device.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks ago, I'm crawling around in my attic looking for something completely unrelated. And I come across a box, and what's sitting on top of the box? Two of those little recharging things that I can never put my hands on.
Never fails.
No. And my dad actually saw the video, and next time he saw me, he gave me two more. So
that's great.
But yeah, so that's, again, because that radio is a little bit sentimental to me. I don't mind, bringing more into what the collection was and what I had and pick up the pieces. And even now I have for that radio, and I never knew existed until I saw it on eBay. There was like a mobile interface kit, I guess you'd call it, that would stay under the dashboard, and you could take this radio and you'd slide it in, and you'd make the external antenna and power connections, and then it'll allow you to take the radio with you in the car and use a bigger speaker. So it's interesting the way that things were and are and have been. So yeah, so that's that radio.
So I got started in '76. I got the Realistic Pro 5 scanner, and that was my only scanner for several years. And during that time, I was still in college. I was taking additional classes after I'd gotten my 2-year degree. I was going back and trying to finish a 4-year degree. So I didn't have a whole lot of time for scanning, but I did use it on occasion to listen to what was going on in the community, and came in especially handy during adverse weather events. And like I said, I lived 47 years in the Houston area, so it got quite the workout. And then my first synthesized scanner was the Regency HX1000, and that opened up a whole new vista. You didn't have to run down to Radio Shack every time you needed to get a crystal. And I believe it was a 40-channel radio, and it had a built-in rechargeable battery and a base, and it really was a whole new vista for me. And then in 1990, I got my ham radio license. And I would say to your listeners now, if you don't have at least your technician class ham radio license, you really need to think about doing that, because it teaches you so much about RF propagation, about antennas, about electrical theory, things that will come in really, really handy in this hobby. And then my next scanner was a Pro 2006, and that opened up a whole new world again because of the capability of that scanner. And it was a much more serious industrial strength piece of hardware. And then after having gotten my license and gotten a Pro 2006, I started doing some real serious experimentation with scanners and RF. And I did a lot of antenna design and construction. And that has been one of the most gratifying parts of the hobby, other than the friends that I've made. I've made a lot of friends in both the scanning and ham radio hobbies. But really seriously consider getting your ham radio license. It's scanners and 10 times more in terms of the people that you'll get to meet and things you'll get to do.
And what's nice too about getting into the ham hobby too is the club aspect of it. You can
Right.
walk into any club and ham radio club and instantly feel like you're with your people.
Yeah.
So whether or not you are really big into ham or you're big into someplace else related to radio, if you have that technician class license, you're already part of that group. And there's a lot you learn just by being in the room with people. And
Yeah.
like you're saying, just even antenna design, one of my favorite things of the hobby is antenna design. I've had a few really good antennas I built, and I've had a few catastrophic disasters.
Stinkers. Yeah.
Yes, real big stinkers. And you think while you're building it, like, oh, this is better than what's on paper, and then it falls flat on its face. And even worse is when it falls flat on its face when you're trying to use it around a bunch of people.
Mm-hmm.
So you have your pros and cons there, but there's a lot of different aspects. And going back to antenna design and club, one of the clubs that I used to be really involved with, they would build their own antennas. And one of the guys that was an Elmer in the club, he was really bright when it came to design and building the antennas. And every antenna that we deployed for field day, he designed. And we would operate barefoot, which means, for anybody listening, no amplifiers. We would run straight stock right out of the radios, and we would break through every single pile up like it was nothing. Mm-hmm. And his antennas were spot on, and they all worked. And it just goes to show you what a couple of masts and a couple of wires and a balun and maybe an antenna tuner, just to sweeten it up a little bit if you needed it. We really didn't need the antenna tuners. What that could really do for you. So again, even in the VHF UHF world of scanning, there's a lot that we can do with our own homebrew antennas. Mm-hmm. And again, not to derail us here a little bit, but just to impact on you a little bit more, single antenna dipoles or ground planes that you can build specifically for a frequency you want to monitor, even for ADSB. I mean, I've seen some really tiny antennas that people are using. And why go out and buy one if you want to tinker? It's right. And it's just one of these rewarding things that you can say, wow, I built that and it's working better than I expected it to work. And it really, if you're looking again, it's a OS259 connector and a coat hanger, and you can make your own antenna, maybe a couple of screws and nuts too. So it's a really, really basic design. But again, to know how to build it, all of that information is right there in the technician's test. The formulas to how to build an antenna, that's all you need is that simple formula. And even after all these years, I still remember, most of the formula, not all of it, but I still remember the lambda over 465, was I think the core of the calculation to get you there. So, but yeah, it's to get into the hobby. I know a lot of people turn away from it, but it's a lot easier than people expect, especially when they get a little test shy. You can go online, you can take that test over and over and over again for free until you're confident enough to walk into a center. And I've seen it with my own two eyes. People walk in there, they take that test, they submit it, they get it in within 5 minutes. It's graded 100% because they spent the time. It's just to go there and sit and take those tests online. And they really were able to hammer that information home. So they were comfortable enough to take the test. So, and you don't need to ace it at 100%. to get your license either. And now it's even
Right.
more fun too, because your license is posted, right? They submit
Hmm.
it, it's electronic, it's posted. We had to wait for our license to come in the mail, and it
Oh
was like,
yeah.
when is it
Yeah.
going to get here? So,
Right.
but so what kind? I mean, let's go a little bit off of script here. So, any antennas that you've built that really stand out? One right
As
there.
if
Look at
on
that.
cue. Yeah. This one, I just had it. I thought it was such a cute little novel antenna. I took the base of a lamp. This is a battery powered lamp.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just by fluke. We hadn't even talked about me showing this thing. It's just by fluke. But I put a BNC connector on the end of it, and you can plug any antenna into it you want to. And it what it does for me, it's only got like an 18-inch cord or coax connector on it, but it allows me. I keep my SDS200, my Uniden. Let's see where it's right. I can't see, the screen's too small, but it's right over my shoulder here. But I keep it on my desk, and uh, it helped a lot to be able to get this antenna right at the windowsill. And so I built this little antenna and put a heavy weight in the bottom of it and so forth. It's collapsible, so I can change the length of the antenna to get it to a resonant frequency, push it, raise it out for weather and push it in for 800 megahertz. But yeah, this is the latest Frank antenna I built. But I've built just dozens and dozens of antennas and just love it. I still enjoy doing it today.
Nice. I love the fact you had one like right there.
Yeah, I just thought at the last minute, I'll show them that. That's kind of cute. So
Excellent.
anyway,
So, how did you progress from getting into scanners and getting into ham and now building antennas? How did you? Where else did this take you?
yeah. So uh, I wanted to be able to get feedback from the local hams, and I also wanted it to be part of my community service. So I started a website called HughScan, and where scanner enthusiasts could go to get the local frequencies. This is uh, very early internet days. It was pre-radio reference days, and by the time I shut that website down, when Radio Reference came on, that site was totally redundant and nowhere near the phenomenal success of Radio Reference. So I shut it down, and I had over 500,000 hits. And the most interesting hit that I would get, and I had some tracking software that would tell me where the hits were coming in from, who was actually logging in or coming in and viewing the site. And the most interesting was from the Department of Justice. And I thought, that's weird. And I noticed a trend over time. Every time President Bush Sr. was coming into his hometown in Houston, I would get a hit from the DOJ. And I later figured out that they were coming out to check my website to see if I was posting any of their frequencies, or, back then they were even using pagers to some extent and so forth. And if you had the right software, you could decode those. And so I never ever put anything out there that could compromise officer safety or anything like that. But I thought that was kind of interesting that the DOJ was going out and looking at my little website. And then of course, like all of us, I've bought and sold more scanners than I can count. But I think over the years, I've had probably 50 years experience, 50 scanners. So a whole bunch of them.
That's interesting that you're seeing the DOJ on there, and
Yeah.
again too, from somebody that has their own scanner ready website that's kind of starting to get dusty and full of tumbleweeds and everything else like that because it's just not being maintained the way that it used to be. Um, my perspective on having your own site is I'm all for it. I mean, I'm biased because I do have my own website, but I think they complement Radio Reference. It's not so much that it
Mm-hmm.
competes with Radio Reference because there is no competing, right? It's just
Right.
Radio Reference is just so big and it's so well known and there's a
And
lot
well done.
behind it.
Well
What's
done. It's well done. Well
it
put
is
together.
it is very well done, and every time you think it's done, there's another rev that just keeps coming that does something else to it. And I think there's a great idea that there's a global, but there's also something nice that's a local.
Mm-hmm.
And again, when it's yours, you have control of it. So if you wanted to put something on there that they don't want to put on theirs, that's up to you. Or if you don't want to show something that's on theirs, again, that is also up to you. So there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to your own stuff, even to the point too where again, where you want to promote a book or a website or services. That's what my website was primarily for. If somebody was looking for local scanner radio stuff, they would see when I was doing it my programming information. They could reach out and contact me directly and have me program their scanner radios for them. I'm no longer doing that, but it was a great avenue to be able to do that instead of spamming Radio Reference or Facebook or something like that and saying, hey, I can do that. It's because if you're trying to do that on a national scale, it's like fishing without any bait. You kind of just wait for somebody to find somebody to get. But it also adds that little bit of authority to, that what you're talking about, and you've been around. And again, you could share your own story and your own spin on things. So it's I think they complement each other. I don't think one supersedes or would let one go away. But I can see, again, with me not really touching mine now for 2 years or so, I can see
Yeah.
why, after a while.
They're a lot of work.
Yeah, they are a lot of work. So, and when you don't have time for them, it's even that much more work. And then when you also know they need to be updated, then it's like, do I feel like doing this?
Right.
What's the point? So, but I've noticed it. I've noticed in my forums that there's just not any activity in them anymore, and people even posting, why bother coming here? The website's dead, and it's true. But a lot of people too, they go right to social media. I mean, forums. I've seen forums fold all over the place because of just the social media aspect and where people are. And I would expect social media now to start falling off with AI, because I'm using AI.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just
really
playing around with it, and just to see how well it would work. And I said, hey, I'm in New York City. I have a scanner radio. Can I listen to NYPD? I mean, I already know the answer. And it did not give me the correct answer. And I said, well, can you look specifically at this source and tell me, is NYPD encrypted? And only once I directed it to where it had to go was it saying, oh, you can. So, but I think as people get used to using AI as an actual assistant and not an intelligence thing, we may find that, you can see Facebook, they want to get their AI in there. They know, they see the writing on the wall. But so yeah, now going back to having the websites, I think that even still, it's still something. Even if you don't even update it shows a record in time as to how things were. So
right.
That's always interesting. So,
hey, speaking of books, real quick,
yep.
This is a book on hurricane preparedness. I know a lot of you guys are probably down in the Gulf Coast or the Atlantic Coast. Hurricane Preparedness for the Home and Family. I wrote this a few years ago. It is a very, very comprehensive book on how to get your home, your car, your kids, your pets ready for a hurricane. I wrote this, I think it's been 6 or 7 years ago, 8 years ago now. The material is still pertinent. Hurricane preparedness doesn't change a lot. What is important to know also about this is I don't make any money on this book. I give 100% of the proceeds to the Louisiana Cajun Navy every year. And so if you want to really know how to get ready for a hurricane, the book's $20 on Amazon, $10 if you want to get the Kindle version. But really a good book. I believe I've had a lot of positive feedback from a lot of folks.
Excellent.
But anyway,
we've had the Cajun, somebody from the Cajun Navy on here many moons ago, and it's extremely interesting just to hear from a volunteer organization how they operate. And I've never really heard of the Cajun Navy until a couple of years ago. So for you to give back to them, that is excellent. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah. When during Hurricane Harvey, they came into Houston, just bunches and bunches of boats getting an escort from Louisiana over here to help do search and rescue, own money, own time, own equipment, own gasoline, everything. These guys were just amazing, and I still get chill bumps when I think about the great things that they did. But anyway, I got really involved in scanning, especially trunk scanning in the 1990s when the analog trunk system started coming on. And I've had many Uniden trunk tracker style scanners over the years. And anytime Radio Shack or Uniden would come out with a new one, well, I'd put the other one on eBay or two of them and sell it and buy one. at one point, and I probably should have sent you a picture. Maybe I can send you one you can still post that had my listening station before, and it was actually shown in Monitoring Times magazine. I had 6 trunking scanners and the Pro 2006, all able to switch to a recorder when I needed to, and so got very involved in trunking in the 90s. And I started playing around, trying to get further and further out. Houston's big. It is an enormously large city, and the Harris County footprint was very large. So there was sometimes a challenge to get some of the far-reaching repeaters. And so what I started doing was experimenting with cellular amplifiers and antennas that I had found on eBay. And these were some of the very best antennas and amps that I found. The cellular corner reflectors worked really well. I had splitters. I had Telewave 800 megahertz amplifiers. I don't know if those would work today, especially since the frequency range is a lot wider than it was when I was originally doing this. And then I had a really high gain Yagi or beam antenna up in the attic on a rotator. And my wife went up there and she looked around and says, "It looks like a CIA listening post up here." But I started playing around with commercial radios, the standard GX 4800s and the HX 582s. And I got a wild hair. I'd heard about the Optoscan OS 456. And so I reached out to Monitoring Times Radio, and my heart broke when I found they were discontinuing that. But Bob Grove was getting up in years, a tremendous guy. And I reached out to Rachel Bond, I believe her name was, Baum or Boffman. But she was a sweet, sweet lady, a great editor. And I pitched the idea, and she goes, "Oh, yeah, that'd be fantastic." So I got a hold of Sam Dunham, who was working with optoelectronics at the time, and got a copy of the OS 456 and put it in my Pro 2006, and ended up being his beta tester and working with him on some of the design changes and so forth on that radio.
Interesting.
And then in February 1995, I actually shot the cover for Monitoring Times on an article called Scanning the Traffic. And if you go out and dig far enough, you can find a copy of that on the internet still. It was February 1995 issue of Monitoring Times, and then I wrote the lead article for that, and that was a lot of fun. As a matter of fact, I've still got a copy of it framed and up on the wall here in my study. And from there, I ended up writing a lot of feature articles and a lot of reviews on scanners, frequency counters, and various products in Monitoring Times. And then I wrote one article for Satellite Times magazine.
Interesting. I remember Monitoring Times, one of my favorite magazines that would show up in the mailbox at .com, and it was again, we talk about websites going away. Print magazines are the exact same way these days.
Yeah.
It's a shame, but there's nothing like having, I've got my DX engineering catalog right here. There's nothing like getting something in paper and thumbing through it.
I know. I miss the Radio Shack catalog.
Yes.
I actually wrote to the board of directors when they discontinued that. And I said, "You guys are making a huge mistake because so many people depended on that catalog. Buyers at companies used to use it all the time, and
right.
It was great. Again, like Christmas, getting that thing."
Yeah. And if you were a little nerdy like us, it'd be like, this is my Christmas list. This is what I want.
Yeah, just put a sticky note in it and hand it to the wife.
Exactly. So you use the OS 456 inside your Pro 2006. So let's derail a bit there, because I do have one of those radios, and I specifically found it on eBay. And again, I only bought it because it had the Osmocom board right in there. Let's talk about that, if you don't mind, for a few minutes. Let's break down what made that really revolutionary for its time, and what exactly did you do with that? You said you were a beta tester with it, but what software were you running specifically? And let's talk about the fact that it was a DOS, probably, right? A DOS program. So
as I recall, it was DOS.
Yep.
So Sam actually had developed the software for that. Now, I don't know if somebody else came out with software for it later.
Okay.
It was, to be fair, pretty clunky, and especially
Mhm.
when you got into the trunk tracking version of it, it was real clunky. But it was, to my knowledge, the first real computer control. I know it was the first computer controlled for the Pro 2006, and that was really, really cool aspect of it. And so I enjoyed that quite a bit. And what I did was test for functionality, and then I would work with it. Having been in software for years and actually run QA departments and QC departments at major corporations, I had a lot of test experience. And so I'd come back to Sam and say, hey, this is a little bit rough around the edges. You may want to tighten this up. And here's a bug I found, and here's some idiosyncrasies and weird things that it does, and things that you can make this better. And Sam was an electrical engineer and was purely heads down in the electronics and the software design and coding. And so I kind of gave him a little bit more of a user perspective and a real world look at his product. And he was great. Guy was absolute genius. How he managed to uh, develop that product and get past patents and so forth with his own technology. And it was a fun project, and it was great to work with Sam and Optoelectronics.
Nice. I know there was a piece of software called Probe also that would allow you to control the 2000, I think 5 and 6 with the Osmocom board on there as well. And just the ability now to look back at that and say, okay, that was 20 plus years ago, and we're not really even there with what Probe did with making separate, like you'd have a scan list, you would hit on a frequency, and then it would make a separate scan list that it would default to after that because it
Mm-hmm.
triggered a rule to scan something different, then it would go back. So but even nothing else out there logged frequencies and logged PL codes and would allow you to just manipulate a scanner radio, because everything up until that point was pretty much hit the keypad and punch data in
Yeah,
and sit there with your spreadsheets. And then if
right.
you're off by one row, why am I on channel 198 and I should be on channel 200? You got to go back now and move
Mm-hmm.
everything up 2 channels and find you. It was worse
Yep.
than taking a Scantron test and being off
Oh
at the
yeah.
end.
Been there, done that.
Yes, absolutely. And you probably still have the panic nightmares to prove it too, right?
Yeah.
But Probe and the Osmocom and everything else that was interfacing in with it was very revolutionary for its time. And
Mm-hmm.
again, DOS days, serial interfaces,
Oh.
and yeah, yep. To see where we are today as a hobby, and it's I still feel like it's always the tip of the iceberg as to where things are, but
Mm-hmm.
just to see where you had to have been to get to where we are today, and you think it was rocket science then, is unbelievable.
It was challenging, but boy, was it rewarding.
Yep. So those were the scanners from yesterday.
Yep.
What are you using today to
I'm
scan?
going to, pardon me while I reach over here. I want to pull this out. I should have thought to do this earlier.
Sure.
Um, One of my favorite rock solid scanners in the world is this little guy. It's the Unication G5. These are not really scanners. This is a pager for fire departments, but you can coax it into being uh, there's a UHF and trunking version. There's a VHF and a trunking version. This is the UHF, and it will only pick up, I believe, one UHF channel at a time, if I'm not mistaken. I never really played with the UHF channel, but it is a rock solid radio. I usually have this one in the car. I just dropped it in the charger here. They're expensive as heck. I think they're $600-700,
They're
something
even
like
more than
that.
that today. They're about
Yeah.
850.
Oh yeah, but man, it is heavy duty. It's made for industrial and fire use. They're hard as heck to program. They're hard to learn to use effectively, but it is the most sensitive and selective radio with the strongest audio and the most rugged case that I've found. Uh, this one's banged around in my car. It was one of the early G5s, and it's banged around in the car for years and just is still great. And I just absolutely love it. When I go on the road, I carry my SDS100. I always preload it with the local frequencies. even though you can, as most people who have an SDS 100 or 200 know, you can't, or 150 now, you can just go out and enter a zip code in and let it do its thing out there. But that's slow. It goes through practically everything on the list for that area and determines based on the service codes of whether you want to listen to police, fire, EMS, or whatever. I always preload it with a local scan list, and then uh, that way I have something as soon as I arrive at the location, I can hit the ground running. And I also have the local emergency frequencies plugged into a list, police, fire, EMS, everything that would potentially affect me that I know of within a 5 mile radius.
So as a dealer for Unication, the G5 is, I mean, I'm going to talk about it from a scanner rate perspective just to keep
Mm-hmm.
in my lane during this conversation. But yeah, so the pager will do trunking on UHF or VHF in addition to
Really?
700, 800.
Yeah.
And you can set up the scan lists on UHF if you're using it for conventional. You are limited to 16 channels though in the scan list.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
the issue with those is you're right. They are pagers. They are made primarily, or they are made to alert, right, for
Mm-hmm.
a fire call. So because of that, you cannot go between conventional and trunking in
Mm-hmm.
the same scan list. It's impossible to program it that way because if you were to flip flop back and forth, you'll miss your page.
Right.
And also, it doesn't allow you to move between sites on a trunk system while you're monitoring there, again, for the same reason, because if you're going to come off a site and onto a site, you could miss that page.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to lock you in. And if you manipulate the programming the right way, you can then program it in per site on a scan list. So now you're in control of if you're on the 700 layer or an 800 layer or this one or that, this city, or you could just let it roam the way it's supposed to. And when it finally drops off of that one site, it'll go on to another one, but it may drag it back in. So, yeah, it's a pager. Like you were saying, it is a pager. It's a commercial based program first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
And then also then to tie into what you were saying about zip code scanning and taking the SDS around with you. I don't like the zip code scanning. I understand why it's in there. I know, again,
Mm-hmm.
what we talked about before, walking before you can run type of deal. The original HomePatrol was made for somebody to unbox it, plug it in, enter their zip code, know nothing about scanning, and listen to something.
And
But
great radio, by the way. That HomePatrol is the best kept secret in the scanning community. Great,
especially
great.
especially once they opened it up a little bit to allow you to
Mm-hmm.
do regular scanning with it and not
Yeah.
just set up favorites list and move on from there. I think you didn't really heard the uproar from the scanner
Mm-hmm.
radio community on what they could not do with that radio.
Yeah.
It is I have the one and the two. I love them both. I
Mm-hmm.
don't get to use them enough. One of my favorite hidden features though on both of those radios, and I think will be something you like, is when you turn off the HomePatrol 1 or the HomePatrol 2, it will go into, if you set it up, weather alert standby mode.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's the only radio that I think that I'm aware of. Maybe the Whistler TRX1 or 2 does it. I have to double check that one. But when you power it off, it'll go into standby mode. Every other radio, you got to either put it into standby mode or you turn it off and it's off.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, to me, my HomePatrol is great. Leave it on here, turn it off. It's my weather alert radio.
Yeah.
So,
Great
so
radio.
that's a great radio. But yeah, the whole zip code scanning, I understand the reason behind it. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's good in theory, but when you have like where I am here on Long Island, if I set my zip code to where I live with zero radius, it wants to load in national databases, Connecticut, New Jersey, and New
Mm-hmm.
York City and Long Island, and I can't hear 90% of that from where I'm sitting with the regular antenna that's on top of it. It just does. It won't come in. It's too far away. Even my own county will not come in with that type of antenna because of the terrain.
Yeah.
So I get it. I know why it's there, but you're right. If you can preset, if you know where you're going and you can put those scan lists in ahead of time, by all means, that would be the way to do it. So,
Yeah.
yep. All right. So moving on, can you talk about again where you've been scanning. I know you're big into weather monitoring. You've seen a few things, and I'm sure you've heard a few things. Can you talk about maybe where you've been using the scanner radios to kind of help you out or guide you
Yeah.
with writing the book, or just some experiences you've had with the scanner radio
Oh, yeah.
and severe weather?
Yeah. So back to 1976 when I got that first scanner, the Pro 5. One of the very first things that happened is in the Houston area where it floods if you get a heavy dew. We had a real bad flood that day, and my wife and I both worked downtown at the time in the evening shift. And so we made it to work, but we were downtown and it had rained through the evening. It had stopped raining at that point, fortunately, but the roads were still flooded. And of course, this is way, way pre internet days, pre 24/7 news, weather on TV, any of that stuff. We were basically in an information vacuum. So we were all there at the bank, trying to figure out if we were going to be able to get home or not. And we didn't want to get stuck out and have to spend the night sleeping in a car. And our only option to stay downtown at the time, the only safe place that was close to where we worked was the Hyatt Regency Hotel, and the rooms there started at like $100 a night, which today would probably be about $500. And that was a big hit. Well, I had my scanner with me, so I turned it on and was listening to the east side of town where I lived at the time. And I was listening to Houston police, and an officer was on the way to a domestic disturbance. And he said, "Hey guys, if I need backup, I'm going to tell you the route that I take to get there. So if anybody else has to come over and back me up, this is the way you get there." And apparently he was pretty familiar with the area. I suspect he may have lived over there. So anyway, as he's going, he's giving a sequential step by step of his route. Turn left on this road, go down Freeport, and turn right, and et cetera, et cetera. So he basically gave me all of that information I needed. I'm just sitting there frantically writing notes like crazy. Again, pre GPS,
Mhm.
pre cell phone, all of that. And so I wrote these notes down, called the wife, said, "Hey, I'm coming to get you. We're going to go home." And so we followed that route home and saved at the time probably $120, which basically paid for the scanner. So that was the first incident that I had. It's like, this thing might be okay after all. We might be able to use this for some
And you finally got
real.
your wife's approval to actually have the
Oh
scanners, right?
yeah, yeah,
Up
yeah.
until that point, right?
Right. Oh, then she actually enjoyed it. She enjoyed listening to it too. Uh, but there were also numerous times, going forward up into the 2000s, uh, where there were times when she would be working downtown. Now she was at working a day job now, but she would get caught in an area that flooded pretty badly, and so I would be able to listen and tell her when the floods were coming, either get out now or plan on staying late. She was in a secure area that didn't flood, but around her did. So I would be able to monitor that and give her information on that. She was actually able. I picked up a active shooter scene one time at a local school there in Cypress where we lived, and fortunately, it turned out to be a false report, but it was still an absolute unholy mess over there, getting past all the police and ambulances and everything that had staged. So I was able to keep her potentially out of harm's way. And the big thing for me was being able to uh, get the news before it was on the radio, before there was Waze and Google Maps and so forth. I was able to hear from the traffic reporting aircraft and from police and fire EMS dispatch where there was a bad accident. And having a 5 minute advantage over the other commuters meant that I would see that exit coming up and be able to zip off on that exit, get down on either the feeder road and go around the accident or go out on an alternate route home. And man, that just saved so much time. It was just amazing. Um, and then another time, there was an incident where a good friend of mine who owned a shooting range, I had a scanner I kept in the garage turned on all the time, just kind of ran the background. So when I was working out there, I could listen to it. And it was a Saturday, and I heard a fire drop at the local shooting range, and my friend was the owner of that. So this was the only time that I ever went out what I call ambulance chasing. I went down to that scene to check on Kurt, and when I got there, he was running in and out of the store, bringing out guns. And I grabbed him by the arm and I said, Kurt, is this stuff insured? He said, yeah. I said, why are you risking your life saving guns? Yeah, good point. So he sat down. The ambulance crew came over, gave him oxygen. And a few seconds later, I saw the guys on one end of this building. They had this big, huge garage door on one end, and then the shooting range was on the other, and the store was in the middle. And I saw them raising that door, and I thought, oh, this is not going to be good. And you've seen the movie Backdraft where
Mm.
that flame just comes out. It came out the door on the end by the shooting range. Just this big, like 12-foot tongue of flame just shot out the door.
Wow.
They had three firefighters come out there. Their helmets were just charcoal. They looked like a marshmallow that had been dropped in the fire. They were really lucky to be alive. And I got to thinking, if I hadn't have grabbed him at that time and kept him from going in there, he would have been killed. There is
Mhm.
absolutely no doubt he would not have lived through that. So that is that made the hobby entirely worth it for me. But there's been lots of times when I was able to get the inside scoop on what was transpiring in my company. You know, there was a aircraft crash in the neighborhood, and I would listen. I got to listen to the all of the guys who were looking for the missing aircraft. And as a pilot, I actually got out. I wasn't exactly ambulance chasing. I was actually trying to help out, and just went around the vicinity and took a big spotlight and was out there looking to see if I could see anything because they were having trouble triangulating on it. And then one time we were on a cruise, and I had my scanner with me, and I had the optoelectronics frequency counter with me, and so I was able to get their internal repeater frequencies, and we were ready to go on a shore excursion, and the time stretched on and stretched on and stretched on, and they really wouldn't give us any information, and the line was 1,000 people long. And so I was listening on the scanner and was able to determine what was causing the delay, and knew that it wasn't going to be fixed anytime soon. So I put my scanner underneath my shirt, you know, discretion being the better part of valor, and
Absolutely.
ran a little earbud up to my ear. And so we went down and ate snacks and hung out in the cafeteria for about 3 hours. And the kids went off and played games and did stuff while everybody else was still standing down there in line. And then when I heard that they had fixed the problem and we were getting ready to deboard or get off the ship, while I was able to go down there. So we had a fairly good experience out of that, even though we were delayed and didn't end up standing there in a frustrating long line. So you know, those are just a few of the things. There are just countless times where having a scanner has really come in handy and potentially life saving.
Mm, absolutely. So before we wrap up and end our conversation,
Mm-hmm.
you've been scanning decades and decades now.
Yeah.
Can you just list maybe a couple of lessons or something that you've learned over these years that if you could pass them on to the next generation of scanner radio users or somebody who's just
Mm-hmm.
walking into the hobby, what would be some suggestions or hints or tips that you'd pass along to them?
Yep. First of all, remember your ABCs. Always be carrying your scanner. If it's battery powered, make sure you charge it or check on it periodically to make sure it's ready to go. I arrange the banks in a logical order of what's logical for me. And the first bank, like I mentioned earlier, is police, fire, EMS, life flight, media for my immediate area as best as I can get that down. So if something's popping in my neighborhood, I can turn the radio on, the scanner on. Unfortunately, here in New Braunfels, almost everything but fire is encrypted. But when I was in Houston, that worked real well, and I could just turn it on, go to channel one, and immediately get an overview of what was happening in my area. The other thing, I have no affiliation with RadioReference at all, but I'm telling you that is the best money that you'll spend on uh, getting a good, true, trusted source of information. And then for the radios that it's available for, and that's most of the trunking radios nowadays, is I recommend the Butel software. It costs about $50. It interfaces with RadioReference. And I see all these guys out on the internet going, oh gosh, I don't know where to begin. This is complicated as heck. And it is complicated when you're starting out. you can get that software, feed the information in from RadioReference, put it in your radio, and be up and going in an hour or two. And from that point on, you can say, I want to start monitoring, San Antonio fire or whatever, and I can plug that in and get it going in 5 or 10 minutes. So that can save you just an enormous amount of time. And again, I have no affiliation with either one of those companies or services. Don't be afraid to try new, unusual, and unique antennas. Again, the little one I built here, I built out of just repurposed lamp parts and things I had lying around. So that is really the fun of scanning, the fun of ham radio. And then again, learning to build your own antennas can be really educational, and you can come up with things that you can't even purchase. I've built corner reflectors, I've built Yagis, all of these things that have really been great. And finally, I'll leave you the golden rule of scanning. Don't divulge or post anything you hear on the scanner on Facebook, Instagram, or other social media sites. In some cases, that can be illegal, but it is one of the main reasons local agencies encrypt their traffic. So don't go blasting this stuff out there on social media. Always be a good steward of the information that you have and received, and you may share it with a buddy about what's going on in the neighborhood or a family member or something, but don't go just blasting this stuff all over social media, because you are basically shutting down your only avenue of information, and they can encrypt that stuff so fast nowadays it'll make your head swim. So be a good steward and be a good neighbor, and don't jeopardize the lives of police officers and firefighters and so forth by posting this stuff. And with that, I'm done.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much. Now, one
Sure.
more time, can you just list off the places to get your book, your
Right.
website, your services, and everything else?
Absolutely. So hidefromthewind.com is the place that I recommend you go for the latest in hurricane preparedness. I was looking. Oh, here's my Maglite. This is a Maglite ML300L 4D LED, long running. If you go out to Maglite, maglite.com. This is the best hurricane preparedness flashlight there is. And I tested, literally, really did test over 200 flashlights to come to that conclusion. You can get 10% off on the Maglite website by entering discount code Hurricane10. And again, the proceeds go to supporting the channel and me buying more stuff to test and do reviews on. Also, Furman, Firman, FurmanPowerEquipment.com. You can get 30% off. That's a serious chunk of change on a generator. So they have, if you're not familiar with them, I'd invite you to go out and look at them. I'll be posting more reviews in the very near future on Furman Power Equipment generators that I have. Currently have 7 generators. Yeah, talk about
One for every day of the week if you need it, right?
Yeah, you can't walk in my garage. But anyway, Furman Power Equipment at checkout, use Prepare 30 to get 30% off. And again, Hide from the Wind. The book is out on Amazon. Again, the name is Hurricane Preparedness for the Home and Family, or you can just Google my name or just look up my name, Haskell Moore, and you can find the book. $20 for the hard copy, $10 for the electronic copy, and I guarantee you it is the best book you will find out there on the subject. I talked to police officers, I talked to psychiatrists on how to get your kids ready. I talked to doctors, I talked to veterinarians. It covers, like I said, your home, your car, your kids, and your pets, and all the proceeds go to the Louisiana Cajun Navy. My YouTube channel is at Haskell Moore, and I'm getting set up now to do a lot of videos. I've got the scripts written and everything, and as you well know, that is a major undertaking. So there's going to be a lot of material coming out in 2026. And finally, I would say if you live in a hurricane zone, don't get complacent because everybody's talking about this being a super El Nino year where there's supposedly less activity. That is a basin-wide forecast. That doesn't mean you still can't have a 1983 where you have your own Alicia come into your backyard, came in as a Cat 3, hit Houston as a Cat 1. billions of dollars worth of damage. 22 people lost their lives in that storm. So if you are in a hurricane zone, get prepared. Don't be lulled into complacency this year.
Thank you so much, Haskell, for your
Thank
time
you.
today and for sharing your background and also your wisdom when it comes to being prepared when it comes to hurricanes and hurricane season in general.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Haskell, thank you again for reaching out to me and being a guest on today's podcast episode. And thank you for sharing how your experiences have led to your book and how we can all learn from you. If you want to be a guest on today's podcast, it's simple. Just go to scannerschool.com/guest. There's a link in the notes for this podcast episode. Or if you're watching this on your TV, go ahead and step a picture of that QR code to go right to that webpage. Our Patreon supporters help me create content just like this. If you want to help support us on Patreon, and there's 7 different membership tiers, you can go ahead and go to scannerschool.com/Patreon. Click the link in the description of this video. Or again, if you're watching this on your television, you can go ahead and point your camera right at that QR code on the screen right now, and that'll take you to our Patreon page. That's all for this week. Don't forget to subscribe and let me know what you thought of this podcast episode by dropping a comment. We'll catch you on the next one. Thanks again for watching.